Well, just a few days ago, we first told you about a major rate hike for more than 100,000 homeowners with insurance through Louisiana Citizens property insurance. Rate hikes will increase by 63% starting at the time of your renewal next year. Now, many insurance companies dropped their policies in the state after recent storms, so the number of people with Citizens insurance has increased drastically. This morning, State Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon is joining us with details on this rate hike because this is going to be painful for a lot of people. You had to approve this rate hike. We wanted to have you on to know why.
Absolutely. It's extremely painful. It's a huge increase based entirely on the cost of reinsurance that Citizens and all the other companies doing business in our state buy from international reinsurance companies, 2/3 of which is located offshore in places like Bermuda, London, Zurich, Toronto, Paris. That's necessary to spread our coastal exposure, not just to North Louisiana, there's not enough up there, but we're actually literally around the world with companies that reinsure, companies that do high-risk business, wildfires in California, private flood coverage in Germany, wildfires in Australia. All of it's insured by companies that buy reinsurance to protect themselves from catastrophic losses like the last two hurricane seasons.
So insurance for the insurance companies.
Absolutely.
So you were telling me that by law you had to approve this rate hike.
The law that set up Citizens as a market of last resort is designed to keep it from becoming a market of choice. The state can't afford the exposure for hurricanes. $23 billion was paid to property owners, homeowners from Laura and Ida in the past 2 years. That would bankrupt the state. So it's priced by law above the private sector so that really, when they brought their receipt for their cost of reinsurance, 63% increase over the year before, I had no choice in the matter but to authorize that as a rate increase going forward.
Yeah, and this is going to impact so many people. As you were saying, Citizens is the insurer of last resort, so you end up there when you have a policy that's dropped, and several companies dropped those policies.
Absolutely. The good news is we had a really positive meeting yesterday with the legislative auditor, the revenue estimating conference, REC, the Commissioner of Administration staff, and the legislative auditor and the legislative finance committee. They are supportive, the governor, the speaker, the president of the Senate, the insurance committee chairs, of doing a replication of the incentive program that depopulated Citizens after Katrina and Rita. It went to 173,000 policies back then. We had it down to 35,000 when Laura hit just 2 years ago.
Right, and so now it's back up to more than 100,000.
It's back to 120,000. We'll get it depopulated rapidly again to small companies that in the last session we said, okay, if you want to take on this high risk and buy reinsurance, you have to buy enough reinsurance. So we raised the capital requirements for these new startup companies or smaller companies from $3 million to $10 million so that the ownership has $10 million of their own money, skin in the game when they go to the reinsurance market to protect themselves. And that's what the failed companies all neglected to do, failed to do, and that is buy enough reinsurance for the exposure they had taken on. It's cheaper, more profitable, if you're lucky in a hurricane season, to buy less reinsurance. But this is a high-risk business. We're in a high-risk area in coastal Louisiana. So we copied that from Florida, actually. That went from 2 million to 15 million here 3 or 4 years ago.
So then hopefully you'll see less of these companies running out of money, essentially. How do you incentivize the companies, though, to come to Louisiana in the first place?
Great question. We did it in the aftermath of Katrina Rita when the governor made $100 million of grants available to companies with rules for writing. Only 5 companies took 29 million, but it really, I said prime the pump for the other small companies that saw them successfully write, come to our state and depopulate Citizens and compete with each other, that lowered premiums for consumers like myself. My company that I was with for the past 10 years, Southern Fidelity, is one of the half dozen, 8 or 9 that have failed recently because of their Florida book of business. But while I had that coverage for 10 years, I saved $7,000 a year on my homeowner's premium. Went from $1,000 a month to $400 a month.
Wow.
10 years ago. And I had it for those whole 10 years, and now it failed, so I had to get other coverage. On the rate increase, this is so important for consumers. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st, and it doesn't impact you until your anniversary date of renewal if you're with Citizens. So between now and January, if you can get coverage somewhere else, you'll never see this the impact of this.
Okay.
And if you bought your policy last July, it won't affect you until next July. So you'll have that amount of time to find coverage somewhere else.
Which we were talking about is so stressful, but it's good to know the insurance commissioner doesn't have inside information. You had a company that went belly up as well.
I did.
Wow.
For the last 2 years, I knew it was in jeopardy because the commissioner in Florida, who is the domiciliary regulator and in charge of Southern Fidelity, was keeping South Carolina's director of insurance and myself abreast of his efforts to keep that company up and operating and profitable. He motivated, cajoled those owners of that company over the last 2 years of its existence to put an additional $120 million into what ultimately was a failed insurance company.
Wow.
So I was made aware of that just because of my job and didn't change companies, frankly, because I didn't want to send a message that that company was in jeopardy. That's confidential. Even
though you knew that information. Okay, and here's something else I read, that when these companies go belly up, it's actually the taxpayers who end up paying for it. That is insane. Explain that to us. How does this end up costing us?
And it's similar to the FDIC. Their protection for checking accounts and investment products at banks. It's the safety net for policyholders under failed companies. We haven't had to assess and the taxpayers step in to pick up the shortfall of a failed company for 17 years, 2 years before Katrina. But that safety net allows the Guarantee Association to assess every surviving company to get the cash to pay the claims of the failed company, and then those companies that are assessed over a 10-year period of time get to offset their premium tax liability to the state 1/10 each year for 10 years. So ultimately, the taxpayers are the ones who pay the bill, but it's over a 10-year period of time.
Wow.
So the rest of the companies, State Farm, you name it, they pay for the shortfall, but they get it back in the form of a 10-year, in effect, 10-year interest-free loan to the state that they get paid back with this 10-year credit against their premium tax liability.
Gotcha. Okay, before we let you go, for the 120,000 people who will be impacted eventually by this rate hike, should they be shopping for new insurance now, or should they wait for these companies that you're going to try to convince to come here?
Shop now.
Okay.
Even at the end of this month, when the hurricane season ends, companies will gradually start writing again. They've told me that often. The incentive program that we think will be up and running by January 1st will prime that pump again and get more companies writing more business as we go forward.
All right, this is complicated stuff, really expensive for folks who already, I'm sure, are dealing with lots of costs that come when owning a home in this state. So, Jim Donelon, thank you so much for being with us to explain that. Guys, if you'd like to learn more information about the upcoming rate increase and your policy, you can check online. We'll post a link to the Louisiana Department of Insurance website at wwltv.com.